Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, July 26th. And Ms. Dow, could you call roll, please?
Chair Suma,
Present?
Vice Chair Chang,
Here.
Commissioner Aiken,
Here.
Commissioner Heckman,
Present.
Commissioner Reckdahl,
Here.
Commissioner Templeton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. And I'm wondering if there's any public comments for items that are not on this evening's agenda. I see no one in the room, but maybe online.
No comments in the chambers or online.
Okay, thank you for that. And then, Ms. French, are there any agenda changes, additions, or deletions?
No changes.
Okay, thank you for that. So we're free to get started, but before we do so, on our action item, which is 3200 Park Boulevard, I would like to ask for disclosures. And before we do that, I would like to let members of the public and commissioners know that Commissioner Heckman has to leave for a moment. He will not be leaving the building. He will be going to the back room. He has some other business he needs to take care of, and we'll be watching our meeting at the same time. And that should happen around 17, and then he will come back. So I wanted to let everyone know that. And now we can go for disclosures, starting with Commissioner Templeton.
No disclosures.
We can go down the line.
I wanted to disclose that I watched the video of this agenda item from our July 12th meeting from start to finish. So I've reconstituted myself and am able to participate in the commission discussion tonight.
No disclosures. And I have no disclosures.
Yeah, no disclosures, except I also watched the movie for the the plot was a little thin, but
And no disclosures for me either.
Okay, that means we can jump right into our first. Oh, no, we need to do director's report. I skipped over that. Sorry.
Thank you. I was thinking maybe we'd do it after the item, but
No.
In this case, I will proceed. As we do note in our packet, what is upcoming for Planning Commission, I'll note that the council is coming back into session. August 7th is their first meeting back. We do have the Castellia TDM, final TDM plan that's on that agenda. I'm sure there's something else on it. And then, of course, our next meeting, August 9th, the items are noted in the packet. That's what we're plugging away, trying to get onto that date. It's likely that the implementation of housing element programs that we were targeting August 30th for will be put forward another month due to the scope of that work. So that's about all I have to report. I think Raphael is here as well to.
Thank you, Mr. Ruiz. Do you have something?
Thank you, Raphael Reyes.
Unmute.
You are on mute.
Am I still on mute?
Raphael, you're on mute.
Oops, sorry.
Mr. Ruiz, you are still on mute, so we cannot hear you. I don't know if you can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you. You can't. Maybe my microphone might be off.
I see him.
No, Raphael, you're not muted. I think there are speakers on low.
Okay.
So both of you, Mr. Ruiz and Mr. Yang, you are on. We cannot hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the volume in the chambers is down.
Okay,
Technical
excuse
difficulties on
us.
our side, so hang on.
Excuse us, everyone, while we try to figure out our technical difficulties.
I actually have my transcription on and I can see Mr. Yang explaining to us what he thinks the problem is on our end. Thank you, Mr. Yang.
Forgive us a minute while we pause for technical.
Mr. Yang, would you say something, or Mr. Russ?
Can you hear me? I'm
Yes.
trying to talk now.
Okay, great. We got it now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Rafael Rios, Senior Engineer with the Office of Transportation, with a couple of updates. Just yesterday, we kicked off the Bicycle and Pedestrian Transportation Plan Update Project. This commission will be a key stakeholder as part of that process. So just as a heads up, it will be coming several times to this commission. We anticipate a total of about 18 to 24-month long process for that project. And then another in a construction project, the Alma Churchill intersection and railroad crossing improvement projects. Our department handed it off to the Public Works Department, and that project kicked off. So construction will be starting shortly, with very soon, with potholing and other works, and we'll go throughout through the end of the year. And those are the two main updates I had.
Great. Thank you very much. Is there anything else from staff? If
Nothing else.
Okay, great. We can proceed to our first action item now, which is 3200 Park Boulevard and 340 Portage, and recommendation on the applicant's request for approval of a development agreement and all that goes along with that. And we have no public hearing tonight. We took this continued meeting, and we did that at the last meeting. So we will start with any questions from our commission before proceeding to our deliberation, especially for our two commissioners that weren't here. So would either of you like to start, or?
I don't have any questions from the last meeting.
Okay. Commissioner Rekdal?
I did have one question about, I was reading the tolling agreement, and it talks about that parking along the creek is needed at the Audi building. And because of that, concept 3 for the naturalization might not be possible. Are those parking spots in the easement, or why does the parking prevent naturalization?
Albert, do you want to speak to that? Or do you?
I'm not sure if the parking spaces are within the easement area, but the applicant felt that they were necessary for that building to have on-site parking there, and that, parking across the creek would not really be like a, reasonable, feasible use way to park that site.
Okay. Do you remember if the concept 3 for the naturalization, was that going outside the easement?
I'm not familiar with the details of the various concepts. Sorry.
Okay. The next question about the Audi building. Right now, it's just going to be office space. But if he wanted to make a mixed use and have a ground floor office and then upper floors residential, they'd have to reopen the PC to do that?
No, sorry, go on, Claire.
I was just going to check how we wrote the PC ordinance in terms of what the allowable uses are. I think at minimum, they would have to come back with an updated plan for the ordinance. But let me look back and see what the uses were. I think we did allow housing as a use in all of the.
Packet page 108.
Yeah. But as Ms. Raybold mentioned, each of the PCs incorporates basically the building envelope of the existing or proposed buildings as the development plan. So any changes to that would require a change to the PC.
Okay, and that goes to PTC and then ARB and then council, or what's the route for that?
That's correct. Some minor changes, like a change to a sign or something like that, would not need to go through that whole process. But the example you gave, which was completely changing the building to add additional stories, that would go through the process, PTC, ARB, back to PTC, and then to council.
Okay, thank you.
And we did indicate that multifamily residential would be allowed use under that. So they wouldn't have to actually change the zoning.
Okay,
Like there's the PC ordinance, but the PC ordinance also kind of references the plan.
so you still would have to go
So-
through those meetings.
So you still
but-
have to go through that
But it'd be a simpler
reading.
change.
Yeah, because it's still technically considered a zone change because you're amending like the actual plan sets, the development plan for the PC.
Okay. My last question is about the State Register of Historic Resources. So how does this work? We have different levels, like with the state and federal historic resources. How are those decided? Who decides whether something's on the state resource list? And then the second question would be, is what's the ramification if a property gets on that list?
I think I can't answer this question, but I think Julianne Murphy, I think our historic consultant is on. I don't know if she's joined yet.
Yes.
Okay, great.
I
I don't know
can,
if you could better answer that probably.
No problem. So there is the California Register of Historical Resources and the National Register of Historic Places. If a property is nominated and entered into the National Register of Historic Places, it is automatically listed in the California Register of Historical Resources. It's not a two-way street though. So something could be listed in the California Register of Historical Resources and it would not be automatically listed in National Register.
And who makes the determination whether something's on the list or not?
So a nomination would be prepared and it would be reviewed by a state body, which is a commission that meets 4 times a year. They would review the nomination and then deem whether it was complete or not. That would be prepared by a professional in conjunction with the Office of Historic Preservation. They would give comments and feedback on whether the nomination was complete, and then it would go to the state board for review and approval.
Okay. And then what's the ramifications if something goes on that? Would development be precluded, or there's just some hoops you have to jump through to do development?
No, it would be so it's largely honorific, as is the National Register of Historic Places. The control comes, like many things, at the local level. So it wouldn't have an additional layer of review or ramifications that would be offered by local designation. But it does provide the opportunity to use some benefits that you wouldn't be able to use being listed just locally. Most notably with the California Register nomination, a property would be eligible to use the historical building code, which allows for some flexibility that you don't get otherwise. Other than that, it's largely honorific.
And in terms of, you would also have, if you were proposing to demolish it or substantially modify it, it would be the same process as what's currently moving forward for this project, which is it's still protected either way under CEQA, even as an eligible resource, which this one currently is, as well as actually designated resources. So you would still have to go through the same EIR process, identify it as a significant and unavoidable impact, and council would have to make findings of overriding consideration to allow for that.
Okay, so bottom line is the one that really matters is whether the council considers it historic. This from a impact to the property owner.
Say that again.
So if you talk about federal, state, or local designation, the one that has the biggest impact on the property owner would be a local designation because that controls the zoning, can prohibit them from developing it. Or is that not true?
I wouldn't say, I would say it's all fairly similar, I suppose, but it all comes down to the local level. I think what Julianne was trying to say, it really all comes down to the local level in terms of what's in your zoning code about what resources are protected and what's not protected. And other than that, CEQA protects resources in that it requires a public disclosure process for impacts to those
And
resources.
if I can just add on to that, Claire mentioned the zoning code, also Title 1649, the building code is at play for any category 1 or 2 local historic inventory resource that is outside of the downtown. That is that there's a specific section in chapter 1649 about those types of resources.
Okay. And so how many historic buildings do we have in the city? Is it a few or a whole bunch?
Hundreds and over 160, approximately 160 more are currently noted as eligible. This property included and are for consideration for nomination to the local register for inventory.
Okay, thank you.
But for clarification, what is controlled by the historic designation is the exterior of the building. It does not prevent anything from going on the interior. That's correct, right?
That's not
For
necessary.
single family homes, that is the case. For public buildings, it's not the case. There can be character defining features on the inside of a building that are.
Okay, but do we have, I mean, that's for very special buildings like the White House and stuff, right? So doesn't apply to many buildings, or is that wrong?
I believe there are character defining features about this building on the interior that are technically protected, but I mean, Julianne can maybe speak to this a little bit better, but when you're looking at an impacts to a resource and trying to determine if it's consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards, you're not necessarily looking at this one piece, and if you touch one piece, then everything, is inconsistent. It's more looking holistically at it and saying, how much is this changing the building? Is it changing it in a way that it's really altering it in a way that it's no longer a resource? And so it might be chipping away at this and this and this, and holistically it becomes, but it's not necessarily every single one is,
And that's maybe why the ARB deliberation thought there should be more visibility of the interior of the trusses and the monitor roof then. Okay, thank you.
This one. Never mind.
Okay. Any other questions? I do see one light, Commissioner Chang.
Can I just ask a follow-on question to Commissioner Reckdahl's questions about the historic designation? Isn't another, benefit, consequence of being listed is that if a building is listed, then with respect to building codes, then when development is taking place, development can occur under kind of modified codes if a building is a historic building, correct?
Yes, the historic building codes can be invoked and utilized for historic buildings that are registered, not just eligible, but actually registered.
Okay, thanks. I did have another question that's kind of a follow-on to something that I believe it was Commissioner Aiken asked about last time. And this was regarding the housing element. And so my question was that I believe this project in its incarnation as a SB 330 project was included as a housing element pipeline project. With 91 townhomes or so 91 housing units. So what are the implications what are the penalties for Palo Alto if for some reason those 91 units are not built during the 8-year timeframe of the housing element? And we know, for example, that this development agreement already is 74 units instead of 91. So it's already 17 units short of the 91 that we counted. So I guess it's a twofold question. What's the implication of us being already we know 17 units short of what was anticipated. And then what happens if for some reason, like none of the units get built with respect to this property? Like,
Yeah, so we actually, my understanding, we actually only claimed 74 units as pipeline because we had two projects at the same time. And then 75 were, I think, listed. They were kind of identified as like potential future projects, but they weren't identified, like we didn't claim them as part of our pipeline, but they were identified as like possible when we were thinking about possible locations. So,
And I would just say generally, if there is if there are housing units identified in a housing element and they don't come to pass as predicted, that's why there's a buffer, and we make up for that in some other location.
and sorry, just to re-clarify, I just realized I did write in the staff report, we claimed only 59 as an opportunity site on the dedicated affordable housing site. Understanding that, there could be a range and we weren't really sure how many. We might get a little bit more because the EIR did analyze up to 75, but.
okay, thanks. Sorry, I missed that. There's so much information, but thank you for, thank you for clarifying that for me. And so then to follow up on what Ms. French said, then there's no like by right sort of penalty as a result of if for some, I mean, I just remember when we were going through the housing element stuff, there was something about if that we get penalized when we put something on the housing element and that housing doesn't materialize, right? Where we kind of don't have control over that. I'm not remembering things very well, but I maybe Mr. Yang can help me out here.
But one thing to note is that the housing element is on the whole city. And so property by property, if you're lower or higher, it evens out. But I believe if a property is developed at a lower amount than you had estimated, you have to now transfer something from the buffer into your list.
Okay.
There's no penalties or anything like that.
Okay, good.
I see the city attorney here, so maybe he can clarify this.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with what Commissioner Rectal had said. And as Ms. French noted as well, if development is at a lower density than what's anticipated in one area, we have a buffer to make up for that. And sometimes there will be a project that comes in higher than anticipated. And so we just sort of monitor our progress and we'll make adjustments, identify new sites as necessary.
Great, thank you.
I was just going to add that it is on the interactive map as 91 units in the, but that map may have not be up to date, but in the pipeline category. So we might want to check the map.
Yeah,
I think the map stopped being updated, maybe 6 months ago, but the final adopted version of the housing element has 74 units.
Oh, okay, thanks. I didn't know the map wasn't being updated. Commissioner Aiken?
Hi, just a further follow-up on this same issue. I may be misremembering this, but I thought I recalled that a site that's been identified in the housing element, if it is not used, then there are constraints on its reuse in the next cycle. Is that correct?
So the sixth cycle housing element is the first housing element, I believe, that this rule has taken effect, is that if we called it out and it's we have to rezone it or something like that to be able to actually support. We can't just call it out and call it out again unless it's zoned for that amount of housing. And Albert can correct me if I've misspoken.
Yeah. Essentially, if we have a site that was identified for lower income housing and we want to reuse it for lower income housing, we have to rezone it to permit that type of housing by right at certain minimum densities.
So by right, meaning no local development standards, but that's just for affordable housing projects?
So it's for projects that provide, I'll have to go back and look, but I think it's for projects that provide some level of lower income housing. But by right does not mean that there's no local development standards. It just means that there's no like CUP requirement.
Okay, thank you. And if you can get any further clarity sometime in the meeting that on that issue, it would be good. Thanks. Okay, I don't see lights for any other questions, so we may start our deliberation. And I'm wondering who would like to start us off. Oh, well, I don't see any lights, so I will go ahead with a few observations. As I think a number of us have said before, this is an unusual project because the development, it comes to us with a development agreement already in place, at least proposed, which didn't have any very much public scrutiny because it was developed behind closed doors and closed session. And so we have been struggling, some of us, to take on faith that this is the absolute best use of this unique site, being over 14 and a half acres, that has been zoned for housing for over 3 decades. So I will say that I am still struggling with the amount of housing. And I want to preface this by saying whatever happened behind closed doors may be the best actual deal for all people involved, including the city and the applicant. So that's why I'm happy that whatever recommendation we give here tonight, the council can take into consideration, but they will also ultimately be making that decision. But I struggle with the lack of housing, the amount of housing, not lack of housing, a little bit, thinking there could have been more. In particular in the EIR, which EIRs are always kind of funny, but in particular, I found that the conclusion that there was no feasible way to put housing inside the cannery shell was not fully adequate for me because because we're talking about 74 units on the townhouse parcel, but we examined, I think, the EIR 231 units in the cannery building, which doesn't seem to be a reasonable way to do it to me. And then there was what I thought was a very creative idea to use the portion of the cannery that's going to be demolished, 40% of the cannery that's going to be demolished, to park cars, which would have kind of a doubly good effect or triply good, perhaps, if it's a feasible opportunity, because it means we don't have to have above ground parking, which our comp plan does not prefer. Our comp plan doesn't like to use surface parking, as we like underground parking in situations like this, because then there's more land for things like housing. And it was dismissed as being inappropriate because it would cause an alteration to the exterior of the historic building when the preferred development agreement, in fact, destroys that part of the building. So it's a much less impact on a historic structure to add an egress and ingress for vehicles. And so I didn't think it was fully looked into in the EIR. So that was one problem. And Commissioner Chang has brought this up, the CS zoning land use, sorry, I do that all the time, that the underlying land use of CS was not as appropriate in this location that's interior to what we all hope would be restore to a more regular neighborhood configuration. That CN would be better because it allows for a more compatible mixed use interior to a neighborhood. So that's another thing that is a problem for me. I've already mentioned that the garage is kind of an undesirable as an above ground versus below ground. We have really recently made quite a bid for the appropriateness of underground garages at large institutions in Palo Alto. But I also wondered, and this is probably more a form of a question, but as I pondered this, I thought, well, we know that we may not get townhouses within the 10-year term of the development agreement because it may not be desirable under certain market conditions. And I was wondering why build, if we're going to have, if the 40% of the cannery is going to be demolished and the remaining part finished off, we'll have all this extra surface space until the townhouses are built. And that site, if they are built or if they are ever built, and that the site doesn't really need an above ground garage until then because it will have plenty of surface parking. And that was that was just an idea that I had, and I don't know if it was ever discussed or thought about, but it certainly is a more environmental idea, but it doesn't involve, construction. So I did have concerns, but we've already talked about it being out on, not in sync with the RENA cycle. I had thought that there was a more strict penalty for having something on the list that was on the housing element list that was not utilized in the cycle. And then I guess we have already, moved way on beyond the idea that the ratio at this site had to be maintained as it was, which at the time, last time it came to council, it was 60K for retail and the rest was office or R&D. And I am not convinced that that has been resolved, but maybe that is one of the things that the council resolved in their closed session. And I also wanted to mention that I watched the ARB meeting and this is not in our purview, but just bring it up in case it is a meaningful contribution, that I didn't hear any discussion of bird safe glass in that. And if it's appropriate at the site, it would be very welcome. And I think that also depends on whether the monitor roofs are if they're replaced in kind or if they are saved and then the new glass is on what I think of as the front of that building. So seeing another light, I will spare you from any other of my observations and call upon Commissioner Aiken.
I support most of what Chair Suma said. I'll add a few things. I also support the recommendations from the ARB and the HRB, and I was pleased to see that most of those were incorporated in the other documents that we are to approve. I noticed them in the record of land use action, but they may also be elsewhere. I had a number of concerns about the development agreement, but I found on rereading it and rereading it and rereading it that they were addressed. So I won't raise any new ones there, which leaves only the large one, which is the concern about expanding the use of service commercial designation. The community's vision for this area is really mixed use. I would be happier if we could make a clear statement of intent now in order to guide future development in the area. If I understand the report correctly, we could do this without having a material effect on the current project. That is, it could proceed as presently constituted with service commercial. So this would be an investment in the future rather than a significant change in what we're addressing in the short term. But that's my single largest concern. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I see no other lights. Oh, wait, I see one now. Commissioner Rekdal and then Commissioner Chang.
Can staff describe the ramifications of having the land use be CN versus CS? Because I looked at granted this is for zoning, but looking at the zoning capabilities, they're almost identical. What would be the major impacts of this decision?
So the only thing about the CN is that it's kind of creates an island of CN. There's nothing really around it that's CN, whereas the surrounding development right now is primarily CS, as well as the single family areas. The CN also is, if you read the land use designation summary, it's really used in areas along El Camino Real that have retail shops, as well as our small commercial shopping centers. For example, I think Edgewood Shopping Center, and I believe Middlefield Shopping Center as well. So it's really intended to be more neighborhood serving retail and or neighborhood serving office, more like medical office kind of uses like dentists and stuff. And so that's generally where it's provided throughout the city. It doesn't specifically speak to office uses or research and development uses in that land use designation. It doesn't specifically prohibit them either, but it's I guess less clear that that the proposed uses actually meet that land use designation, which is the entire intent.
So if the zoning is PC, does it really matter what the underlying land use is?
The underlying land use needs to be consistent with the zoning. So that's why we're changing the land use currently, because the multifamily residential land use designation doesn't comply with research and development and office uses. So it starts with the comp plan, and then the zoning needs to align with the comp plan.
Okay. And if we change our mind down the road.
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time? This is where I always get so confused.
Yeah. So everything, if council wants to approve this project, then then what they're approving needs to align with the zoning and the comp plan. And so
because even though it was a legal non-conforming use before, because we're redoing the lots and everything, everything needs to be brought into conformance. Is that correct?
If you're trying to legalize it through this development agreement, then what you're legalizing and saying is now a complying use needs to also align with the zoning and the comprehensive plan.
So is there any way to not legalize it and allow it to continue as a legal non-conforming use?
Albert, I don't know if you can maybe speak to that.
I think that is something that's possible in theory, but I expect that the applicant would not accept that as the state of things going forward. Part of the reason we sort of entered into this process was because there was so much uncertainty around the legal non-conforming status of this property, and so we were trying to sort of simplify by finding a way in which we could agree to legalize the uses. And part of the problem with trying to keep them as legal non-conforming uses is that there are a number of, fairly onerous conditions on non-conforming uses. They can't be discontinued for a certain period of time, and it makes sense because for non-conforming uses, we're saying we don't want them there. And I think what's being proposed is a way of, finding agreement to have these uses as conforming uses.
Commissioner Rectal?
So I'm still struggling with exactly how it matters if it's CN or CS, because it seems like both of those would be consistent with this design.
Again, I think.
Is this kind of a principle thing as opposed to some tangible difference down the road?
I mean, I think that it's something we can explore further, but it's just that the CN land use is less clear about having research and development uses that are not necessarily neighborhood serving. It doesn't quite align as well as the service commercial. And just from a general planning land use perspective, it's odd to have kind of a island. I mean, you'll have islands where there's like a park where you have a PF zoning, but you don't typically have kind of islands of this land use where it's nowhere around there, kind of.
I would I'd also say that traditionally, or in our zoning code, as well as in our land use plan element, that the CN is associated with a lower density of residential than the CS. CS traditionally is a higher, units per acre. So just traditionally in our standard zones, that's the way it is.
Okay, thank you.
I can tell you why it makes a difference to me if you're interested. And this is my understanding of CS versus CN. And CS is traditionally used along El Camino. There's a little bit of it by 101, and then there was sort of a spot zoning done for Ming's, so it could be a hotel but never materialized. CS has development standards that are significantly more impactful. Then it doesn't have the same setbacks and allows greater height, whereas CN zoning is really more compatible to abut R1 zones, and it has more of what we want in the future, since it does, which is what we all envisioned on the NVCAP process. And there were differences in how much housing we thought we could achieve there, but what was uniform across the group and throughout the process, I think everyone would agree, was that we wanted neighborhood serving business and housing. And it does allow for a lot of height. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and staff will correct me, it's 25 feet plus 2 stories in CN. It's 50 feet in CS. And so it just seems more appropriate for what we want in the future. And being a mixed use zone, it doesn't seem to conflict with what we want to make available to the applicant. It just lays out a much more a future that is, see, one of the problems, and is things get lost in institutional memory here. And I think this is what Commissioner Aiken touched on. That will remind anybody in the future that what we really envision here is a mixed use neighborhood, but that's very hospitable to the residents of the neighborhood. And CS also allows larger office, if I'm not mistaken. So that's why I think it makes a difference to us, because we'd like to see this neighborhood evolve in the future. It should, after the 10-year term of this development agreement, we'd like to see it redevelop in a way that is consistent with mixed use at a residential scale that allows residents to use the businesses in that neighborhood. So that's why it matters to me.
So if I could just note that there was kind of a mix there in your comments about zoning that was separate from the land use, and the land use really doesn't speak to.
I'm sorry.
I
always make that mistake with
okay.
CS and CN because they're both land use and zoning distinctions. I meant land use, and the land use, I think, gives us that land use designation gives us a better institutional memory of where we want to go, creating a dense neighborhood there, but one that's very hospitable to residents. So thank you for correcting me on messing that up again.
So I really echo what Commissioner Aiken and Chair Suma said, because this is also what I said at our meeting 2 weeks ago. This is probably the biggest issue for me with respect to this item, because, you know, for more than 3 decades, Palo Altans have said that they want this area to be multifamily residential. And as a result of a potential legal dispute, it sounds like, you know, some question, some interpretation about whether the use of the current R&D use of the building can continue or not. That's why council decided to negotiate this development agreement. When I went back and looked at prior council meetings and why we ended up where we are. That said, if we then choose to use a CS land use, I mean, if I read our comp plan, a CS land use isn't at all consistent with what we want here. It's facilities providing citywide regional services and relying on customers arriving by car. And we've said repeatedly that we want this to be a even in our staff report, we talk about multimodal transportation. We talk about this being a transit-rich area. And it talks about typical uses include auto services and dealerships, motels, lumber yards, and restaurants, including fast service types. And that's not what this is. So, as well as, you know, and giving examples about this being along San Antonio Road and El Camino Road and Embarcadero Road and northeast of the Bayshore Freeway. So that's not what this is. Yes, it abuts other CS areas because it abuts El Camino, but this is in the neighborhood. And so, yes, it makes sense that it would abut a CS zone, but we shouldn't be continuing to extend, it's not zone, a CS land use, but we shouldn't be continuing to extend the CS land use further in, away from El Camino. So I was curious, in the staff report, staff also looked at the mixed use land use. And I was really interested in that because as I continued to read the comp plan, the next land use discussed in the comp plan on page 33 of the comp plan, because I have my comp plan Bible here. But I have the comp plan here. And it talks about the mixed use land designation, which to date has only been used in SOFA, but it seems to make sense here. Like SOFA is exactly what we want, or what I believe the NVCAP group wanted, the NVCAP working group kind of envisioned for this area. And so when staff, I didn't understand, if staff could speak a little bit more to why staff eliminated the mixed use land use idea from consideration, because the explanation in the staff report on it's staff report page 9 of 10, because we have 2 different versions, identical versions of the staff report in 2 different packets.
It's page 15 of the July 26 packet.
Oh, sorry.
For
okay.
those referencing.
Well, the page numbering of the staff report is identical.
Sorry, page 16, other comprehensive plan designation considerations.
Right. So it's of the old one, it's packet page 117. Of the new one, I'm not sure what it is because I was still going off my old notes.
Page 16.
But it says page 9 of 20 of the staff
Yeah.
report. Like there's 2 numbering systems.
Yeah.
So. And it says, additionally, the 1.15 FAR allowance for mixed use, similar to service commercial, did not accommodate for the existing square footage of uses based on the new parcel boundaries. And I'm not sure I understood what that meant, because it seemed like it did account for the FARs that were necessary. maybe it doesn't account for the housing FARs, but according to the comp plan, FARs of up to 3 are possible.
No, not commercial FAR was limited.
Commercial FAR is limited to 1.15.
Yeah.
So what's the commercial FAR in this case?
That's what I was trying to recall for each of the parcels.
But as it is, if that is the case, we could make an exception for a PC zone the same way that we're making for the CS.
No, that's not, you can make exceptions to the zoning, but it still has to align with the comprehensive plan.
Right, but we could make it, sorry.
But
we
you
could
can make
an
the
exception.
same
We could make the same
change,
modification
yes.
to the mixed use land use.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I think it would just be so much more well aligned because of how the mixed use land use is used elsewhere in Palo Alto. And in terms of how it's described.
Sure. So do you want me to kind of answer the?
It'd be great if you could answer what the FAR is, because when I did the FAR calculation, it seemed like it was well under 1.15, but maybe I was looking at the wrong numbers.
Give me a minute to look up the
Sure.
floor area, but just speaking in general, I mean, I think that we certainly considered mixed use as a potentially viable. I think we kind of summarized in the staff report that ultimately we just decided that that the CS seemed more appropriate because it aligned with what was around it, and then the other kind of piece was the mixed use. It was mixed use when you look at the project as a whole, but ultimately each of these parcels are being subdivided. And so each has its own use on the parcel. The townhome parcel is going to be multifamily residential. The cannery building, I suppose, is mixed use, but not in the traditional sense. It's retail and research and development, but that doesn't have housing on it. The Ash parcel is office only, and the Audi building is R&D, and then the public park, is going to have a multifamily residential and public park. And so,
but the public park parcel is going to be a different land use, isn't it?
It was a different land use.
Right, it's going to be a different land use.
Yeah.
And
So
then the townhome parcel is going to have a different land use too. That's going to remain multifamily residential.
I think, so that's where it kind of came down to, if you kind of look at it, each parcel individually, you're not really doing mixed use on each individual parcel. When you look at it comprehensively, you could look at it as a mixed use area.
I mean, I think of it as I go back to sort of, because the comp plan is supposed to be thinking about long-term planning and what the city's intent is long-term. I'm trying to meld this with the vision of NBCAP and bring it closer to NBCAP. And because the development agreement is a 10-year agreement, and our comp plan is supposed to go out to, 2030, and the next comp plan is supposed to go out to, I don't know when, but the comp plan is really a long-term vision document, then there's nothing that precludes us from, after 10 years, deciding to not have office potentially. Like if Sobrato were to sell their parcel, and somebody else were to decide to want to have more mixed use there, I think that would be in line with what the NVCAP folks had wanted there.
So that's what I was going to kind of speak to, is that, remember that this whole area is being redesignated to completely different land use and zoning as part of the NVCAP, which is moving forward hopefully by the end of the year or so. So after a 10-year period, or whenever the terms of the development agreement ends, if you really want to do something else with that parcel, you're going to have to do a legislative action to change the PC zoning anyway, if you're going to change the development plan or doing something. And so if you really wanted to do something as part of that, you could also do a land use amendment at that point in time to align with whatever is being proposed. So
I guess because because our memories are short and because what I've seen, at least with this particular parcel, is for 30 years, for more than 30 years, we wanted multifamily residential. And for various reasons, city council postponed an amortization process taking place. And so now we find ourselves where we are, and it's not multifamily residential, and yet there's a desperate need for housing. So now we're kicking the can down the road, and I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that, like, housing nirvana, right? And like, if we put something that's more clearly aligned with that, and definitely not CS land use that says like, this is like this car-centric zone, car-centric land use, that'll at least head, I don't think that we should be, because the NVCAP process is happening in parallel, we shouldn't be going further away from it, knowing that this process is happening in parallel. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I have 2 commissioners that would like to speak, but I would like to remind everybody that we are amending the comprehensive plan by adding one phrase, bottom of packet page 15, and then packet page 16 of the new one, which reflects that both neighborhood and commercial and service commercial land use zones have what is described as FARs will range up to 0.4, but we are saying, we are recommending, that's for both CN and CS land use, but we are recommending that we would say, but may exceed this threshold in a planned community zone to reflect the fact that what is being asked for here already exceeds that. And the same language is in CN zoning. And so I would just make that comment and move quickly to Commissioner Aiken had his light on, and then Commissioner Templeton.
Nearly everything I wanted to say has been covered nicely already. Thank you, Vice Chair Chang. I just wanted to add one minor thing. The rationale that's given in the staff report on packet page 16 about using service commercial because it aligns with the designation of the other surrounding areas, I feel like the direction is reversed from what it should be. We should be thinking of how in the future we might be changing the designations of the surrounding areas rather than the central area. So anticipating what might happen in the future, I would not accept that particular rationale, although I appreciate the value of consistency. Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Templeton?
Thank you. First, I just want to say I appreciate this whole discussion. I think it's very interesting that we're wrestling with different things than when we first started with the NVCAP. I mean, it's progress, and it's also interesting to kind of hear some of that NVCAP discussion reflected back through my fellow commissioners, because you know, that process was fraught and we did not have universal agreement. So when we're discussing what the people want, it's not a monolith. And that's possibly one of the reasons that we're kind of kicking that can down the road, or staff is kicking that can down the road about how to wrestle with it and come to an agreement, because it's pretty complicated. So I think I'm not sure everybody wanted this. I'm going to take an extreme. No one here said this tonight, but just to help reflect on what we're dealing with. There were some proposals that we heard from individual members of the public that were like, put all the housing here. This is where we're going to put all 7,000 houses that we need in Palo Alto, right? And the neighbors were like, wait, what? Yes, we wanted it to be residential, but we did not want it to be that residential, right? So, you know, you take one extreme, you take the other extreme, and it's neither is really reflective of what we need in the community. So I can respect that this discussion is not perfectly straightforward and it's not obvious why we should do what. I am intrigued by some of this land use conversation. Specifically, I want to just encourage staff, if you want to spend 5 minutes talking through your rationale here. That's what I've heard every single person asking for, and really need to walk through it. And even if it's a recap or retouches on some of the things you said before, just understanding, because there's a sense here that we want to make good decisions that last a while. That's what I'm hearing from the vice chair and from other commissioners. So this part that we're in is a discussion with you, and you do have airtime to do that. So is there anything that you would like to respond to in a little bit more detail to help us all get on the same page and understand where you're coming from? And it's okay to take a minute. I know you guys are discussing for those who can't see them.
Give me a minute.
Your mic's on.
I just want to add in.
Your mic's not on.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just want to add in a slide to, just so you guys are aware, I think Commissioner Aiken makes a good point. And so I wanted to just show what the land use map for NVCAP is currently showing as well.
And also the timeline. You mentioned that we have what's in front of us now versus the quote unquote greater NVCAP discussion, and understanding that will be helpful as well. So we don't get mixed up and think this is our only bite at the apple. And if you tell us it's not, and it becomes that, it's going to be a problem. So hopefully we can understand the timeline.
Yes. And just so you guys are aware, certainly if this gets approved, the development agreement gets approved, then the NVCAP is going to need to kind of realign with this, because we would not be changing under the development agreement the land use and the zoning for any site, any portion of the property that's under this development agreement.
So can you just, thank you for that. Please repeat that again, because it's very different than what you responded to Vice Chair Chang earlier.
So
in terms of the separation between what we're doing now and what the NVCAP is going to do, if this decision has unchangeable consequences for the NVCAP discussion, that's what people are worried about. So we need to clarify that.
So if this development agreement is approved, the development agreement does not allow a change to the land use or the zoning for another 10 years or to the end of the term of the development agreement. So portions of the property that are part of this project, this development agreement, would not change land use designation under the NVCAP. Now, the city could come back at the end of the development agreement and rezone or change the land use if they want to. But under that agreement, we would need to revise the draft plan for the NVCAP so that it would align with this comp plan and zoning for that specific area.
So the area that we're reviewing tonight and we'll be recommending things about tonight will be in stasis for 10 years once council has voted on it, even if the NVCAP has different long-term past 10 years intentions for this space. Is that correct?
Sorry, say that one more time.
This area will be in stasis once council has decided what to do with it, regardless of what happens with the NVCAP or what intentions the council has for the NVCAP 10 years plus.
Correct.
Okay.
For 10 years. Now,
well, if they want to do something that changes after 10 years, they could. But during those 10 years, it's stable.
During the term of the development agreement, it would be stable. And if the city came back after 10 years and wanted to rezone, it could do that, but it would then make it a non-conforming use again, and then you'd have to go through the amortization process.
And why is this agreement being done separately from the NV cap. Again, this was because, oh, I see Mr. Yang has chimed in. Do you want to speak or are you just getting ready?
Just getting ready.
Okay. So the reason this is separate is because there was things already in motion. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
You know,
So it has to be separate. There's not a need to align it with the NVCAP process other than our desire to have the NVCAP area function together.
that's right. It does not need to be aligned with the NVCAP, aside from our desire for consistency.
Okay. Ms. Rabel, were you looking something up?
No, I'm sorry. I'm trying to join the
Your
panelist.
mic's up.
I'm trying to join the panelist link so that I can
I have to let,
just share a presentation and show.
Commissioner Heckman has had his light on. If you would like to take some time, I could let him speak
Sure. that'd
first
be-
if Commissioner Templeton is
great.
finished.
Yeah, I had just a couple more things, but
Oh, okay.
I'm happy to come back for a second round if we want to do that instead.
No, whatever you prefer. I thought if staff was looking something up, but if you have other questions.
Well, I want them to respond to all of us so they can respond after Commissioner Heckman
Okay.
goes to, just because I think we're all asking some interesting questions and we need to give them a chance to respond. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Oh, okay.
Then we'll let Commissioner Heckman go while staff
And I'm
is.
almost done.
Okay.
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 No, I'm not done, but I'm almost done.
All right. Thank you for yielding, Commissioner Templeton. And I think actually, I just want to focus some comments on the thing we're talking about right now, because I'm actually finding this conversation a bit odd in the context of our meeting tonight. So we're here presented with an opportunity to make recommendations on a particular project that's been presented to us, refined through many hearings, through many boards of the city. And from my perspective, the conversation we've been having for the last 45 minutes on zoning, it doesn't really have, in land use, doesn't have anything to do. It's not talking about, oh, we like the width of the paseo or really any aspect of the design of this project. To me, what this discussion is really, we find that this project that we're being asked to view is inconsistent with the NVCAP as it's been approved by the city. How can we set this up to unwind it best in 10 years when the DA ends? That's the perspective I'm getting. I'm not saying anybody's saying exactly that, but pulling all these threads together. And again, I'm not even saying that every commissioner is saying that, but overall, that's what I'm hearing is we're looking for ways. We don't like it. In some senses, it's being imposed on us because the alternative, which is the primary project study in the EIR, is the SB 330 project. So we've got this alternative that might give us more of what we want, and the council certainly thinks so. But we're looking, but still, it's not consistent with the NVCAP, and frankly, the NVCAP as approved by the city council is not at all consistent with what this commission recommended to the council should be the NVCAP, a year and a half ago. But that's really where I feel like this is kind of leaning is how can we set ourselves up best so 10 years from now when the DA is done, we can start to change things. And I just want to point out that if the council approves this project and the DA, 10 years from now, the DA may be done, but the PC zoning will still be there. And as Claire just mentioned, if we want to do something about that PC zoning, which will control whether the base zoning is CN or CS or multifamily, you're going to have to go and change it. And if you change it, you're going to have to deal with legal non-conforming uses. And I think that maybe Mr. Yang might want to just comment a little bit about this concept of amortization, because I've heard it mentioned a couple of times tonight, and it seems like a pretty easy concept, but in reality in California, it is very seldom used. It is fraught with litigation, and in fact, there has been discussion of amortization, and it's in this situation already, and it is not an easy solution, and it's not something that you should count on. And so my thinking is, if this applicant, if this project gets approved, this applicant is going to spend, I don't know what, 100 million plus in this area, on this acreage, other than the city acreage. That's not going to change in 10 years. They're going to have a substantial investment. They're not going to be looking to redo things in 10 years. So I think we have to look at a much longer horizon before things are likely to change. And honestly, I don't know what our needs are going to be 20 years from now and 30 years from now. So I do appreciate this conversation, but I think that we should be focusing on the project that is going to, I believe, improve this area from what it is today for the foreseeable future. Thanks.
If I could just one note, the NV cap has not been adopted. A draft was only recently released, and so we did not have the benefit of even the draft for the majority of the deliberations on this project. So
thank you for that correction. I was referring really to the council direction on which iteration of the NV cap that we were going to move forward with, but thank you. I'm going to step out now, Chair.
For the record, Commissioner Heckman is leaving the room, and Commissioner Templeton, did you want to continue?
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate that. I just wanted to weigh in on the last parts that aren't the general discussion, just give a couple of thoughts that I had. Generally, I understand what Ms. Raybould said in response to the Vice Chair's questions about the different types of, now I don't remember if it's zoning or land use, but about the mixed use stuff. Because we're talking about per parcel versus the whole area together. And I think it's frustrating because I understand we have to do certain things on a per parcel basis and certain things on a kind of a region or a working area, but it's something we're going to have to start thinking more about as we get these dynamic areas and we try to build the areas that the people want in our city that are mixed use, but are a conglomeration of individual parcels that are being developed differently, but in coordination. So I really do struggle with the response that we received to that question because we as a city are not able to specify what we want when we do it on a per parcel basis without having this understanding that we don't want every parcel to be developed the same. We want them to have different uses. That's the whole idea of mixed use. So it's a struggle and a frustration. I'm not expecting you to answer it tonight, but that's something that is going to happen more and more. We hope we're going to have these different kind of dynamic areas that are destinations and have different uses at different times of day. And then lastly, just wanted to reiterate or ask you to get more specific about the whole understanding of this site as it relates to El Camino. So this was something else the Vice Chair brought up, and I know she's the most recent. I'm not trying to pick on you, but like, I consider those properties as proximate to El Camino in how I've used them. I've worked there, I've lived nearby, I've shopped there. Like I've used them different ways, but I consider it as something that I enter off of El Camino. And so I was kind of surprised. I mean, specifically, she was absolutely correct. It's not on El Camino, but it's sort of like that, and some of the areas nearby connected. And it's just interesting to think about how you have designated this and how it does sort of stand out in that way. So I wanted to explore that a little bit more too, just because like you've got 6 people up here right now are very interested in this project and thinking about it thoroughly from different angles. And we do desire consistency, and I know you do as well. So being able to just talk through some of like little rationale moments like that with a little back and forth would be super valuable. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you very much.
So let me see what I can do to kind of respond holistically. I would say that I think that we really feel like the service commercial land use designation is where we have a lot of our mixed use. What's interesting is the reference to the mixed use in our comp plan actually references the SOFA, but the SOFA is actually not mixed use. It's SOFA 1 cap and SOFA 2 cap. There's like almost no areas of the city. I think when I looked it up, I found like a couple of parcels that have this mixed use designation. It was hard to actually find where it was in the city. And so it's a little bit unclear. I don't have the background history at the city of Palo Alto from when we originally started that comp plan, or the previous comp plan, I suppose it was from, kind of pulled over of where that came from. But ultimately, a lot of the mixed use areas of the city are in a service commercial area, and where we see a lot of the future development as housing and mixed use housing in particular is areas along San Antonio, areas along El Camino, where we have this service commercial zoning. And so that is very much an area or land use designation that we want to associate with higher density housing and or townhome type style housing, but also areas where we want to have retail components. I think what's kind of unique about this service commercial in comparison to some of the others is it really does speak to the use that's proposed on 3 of these parcels, which is the research and development and or office use. I think that it really, these other land use designation don't, specifically speak to that office use, and where it speaks to the car-oriented kind of development. Things are changing very quickly in terms of transit options and the push for transit-oriented development. And so a lot of office uses still are more car-oriented. I think the reference in that comprehensive plan is more specific to saying, like, are these more kind of neighborhood areas where it's more people walking to them because it's retail that, like, you might walk to Edgewood Center if you live in that area. Whereas, we do have research and development uses that, while it might be transient oriented, and we certainly would, we have a TDM program proposed that would look to provide, maybe different things like that encourage transit passes or things like that. But you still have cars coming to the research and development use. It's not reasonable to think that everybody working in this research and development use are mostly going to be walking to that office use, right? And so I think that's the intent of that reference in the service commercial. It's not that it couldn't be more transit oriented or that we can't put things like TDM programs on to reduce single occupancy vehicle use, but just that where you have service commercial along El Camino or San Antonio, right now, it does have certain uses that are going to have cars.
Just to follow on that, I appreciate you speaking to that. I'm just thinking about, this area was divided when we redeveloped Oregon Expressway. And we have a very large parking structure built off of California Avenue in that part of this area. On this side, where this development is going to be, we don't have a general use gigantic parking structure for any of the uses over here. And where we're proposing one, or where it's being proposed by the property owners, is in a place that's less desirable, is what I'm hearing. Like, I think that there's any number of places you could build a parking garage that wouldn't damage this structure that's being valued highly. So I just wonder if that's something we had looked at as well, and why is this being driven? Is this a requirement that the city has imposed upon the developer, or is this need for all this parking something that we've talked to, like the general area? There's a lot of buildings there and a lot of retail. Like, if you expand just a little bit beyond this particular set of properties, there is a need for, what I'm hearing you say is there's a need for parking there, right? Like, we've got the Caltrain station, which, one end of it is off of California Avenue and the other end is off of this area. So is this something we're imposing on them, or is it requirements? Have we looked at something general for the area that wouldn't be on the site of a building that we want to maintain?
So I guess a few things I would note is, one, it's, I would say both. So we have our parking requirements. We do have some flexibility on those parking requirements because it is a PC zoning, so it's up to council. But, the developer has an interest, not to speak too much on their behalf, but the developer has an interest in parking their site to be adequate for their needs because they don't want to be impacting the residents. The parking is still fairly underparked. I'd have to go to the report to remember the exact numbers, but it is consistent with the historic ratio of the site when this was a, booming Fry's development even. So the ratio.
But that parking for Fry's was not where the building structure is. Right, we're moving the parking.
Yeah, we're moving the parking, exactly. So we're moving the parking from the area, the city parcel where we want to build a park, and placing it back in the location where we're placing it. So if we did not do that, then it would be significantly underparked for the commercial and retail component.
So just to clarify, the reason we're having a tension about the parking is, does it go on our awesome park, our green space, or does it go on our awesome historical building? Right, that's the tension. Is there a third option?
So there's not a third option that I could speak to, but the only other thing I would note is that we did do a Secretary of Interior standards analysis for the proposed development agreement alternative. It is somewhat irrelevant in the context of CEQA, because if you are materially altering a historic building, basically the Secretary of Interior standards analysis is always going to conclude that you're demolishing 40% of the building, therefore it's it's not consistent with the standards. But council expressed a significant interest in retaining as much of the building as feasible and aligning it as much as possible with the standards. And so for that purpose, we prepared a SOI standards analysis. And that analysis did conclude that the parking structure would not be inconsistent with the Secretary of Interior standards.
Okay,
So-
thank you. It's very helpful to go through and just make sure we understand, because sometimes you have perspective that doesn't make it into the packet, and that's really helpful. And just to, hold on a second. Little visitor at my desk space. So just to throw this out there, and I recognize that this is weird. I'm just going to throw it out there though. For example, when we looked at Cubberley and Castellea and other such developments, we've talked about having parking underground and a park on top. So you can have both in the same site. Is that something that we have discussed or considered, or if not, why not?
So we have not, and I think the reasoning is maybe a fewfold. One, council has expressed an interest in potentially naturalizing this area, and that's something that we are still exploring and at their direction are continuing to look at options for. And so we would not want to have a development agreement that precluded that option, as that's a pretty expressed interest of the public. The other piece is just this is in the California Olive Emerson plume. So construction of a below grade parking garage or below grade anything is very expensive. We recognize that, any future housing development is probably going to have, if it has, even if it doesn't have a below grade garage, is going to have some sort of vapor intrusion mitigation system for that. But providing that for a significant area, I can't speak to the cost of that or whether it's prohibitively expensive, but it would be significantly more expensive.
That's really helpful. I appreciate the indulgence here with some of these really curveball questions. And I'll stop there and see if we have any more questions from other commissioners. Thank you.
Commissioner Chang?
Thank you. Did you have an answer to the FAR question about? I didn't know if you did.
I'm sorry, I started looking at it and then
That's okay.
I forgot, but the cannery is actually only 0.54. So that
Right.
did align with that.
Yeah,
but,
that's the method I had come up with as well, 0.54.
but I'm trying to remember what
So it may have been with
Ash.
Audi or.
yeah, I was thinking the Ash building was the one that was the concern.
Okay.
But
While you look at that, I will just, now that Commissioner Heckman's back, I'll just kind of respond a bit to his comments where, the reason I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you thought it was sort of a little bit maybe peripheral or off point that we were talking about, the zoning. And the reason that it's important to look at the zoning is, the land use. The reason that it's important to look at it is because, staff was trying to find a way to make this development agreement work. And in order to do that, had to touch on all sorts of things, including the land use, in order to make it work. And it's incumbent upon us as the Planning Commission to look at all those pieces, as they asked us to do in the staff report, and to think about some of the longer range implications. And I can't speak so much to some of the detail of the development agreement because as Chair Suma mentioned, a lot of that was negotiated behind closed doors, and it may be the best that we can do. But I did want to make sure that we avoided unintended consequences with respect to land use because that is a long-range decision, and we are responsible for the for the comp plan. And yes, personally, I may not like this deal, but that's neither here nor there. It's not so much that I'm thinking, oh, in 10 years, how do we undo all this? It's that in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, it's my job right now to think about what it is that we do want. And land use is by definition, what do we want in 30 years? So we do have to look at that. And I just wanted to bring us all together and get onto the same page. In pre-meeting, I asked staff if Sobrato had a particular perspective about whether the land use should be CN or CS or any other designation. And Sobrato didn't have a particular perspective on that, other than that, as Councillor Yang mentioned, I don't think that Councillor Yang didn't think that they would be amenable to a legal nonconforming continuation. But with respect to the specific land use designation, that's kind of our Palo Alto's internal decision-making. So I think that this is actually pretty important for us to decide, because we are the deciders. We Palo Altans are the deciders on this piece. It's something that we can actually have bearing on, as opposed to the detail of the development agreement, which was done behind closed doors. I don't know if that was enough time for Ms. Rabel to come up with the answer.
If not, I'll add something to the land use discussion, and that is there are, in both CN and CS, there are possibilities for having mixed use, all commercial, or all residential. And then the development standards are slightly different. So I just don't see it as being inconsistent. And as you go up and down the El Camino, I haven't done an exhaustive exact study, but my observation is it's mixed, CN and CS. And so
I did have one also follow-on question for staff regarding that.
Okay.
So if something is zoned not zoned, land use, mixed use, the underlying zone can still be the underlying zone doesn't have to, there can be different zones on a land use. In other words, the parcels could all be mixed use, but an individual parcel could have those three parcels could have the same land use, but each parcel could have a different zone. Is that correct? Not saying that we wanted to do that, but we could do that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And that's what's going to happen here, because each of the parcels will have a PC zone, which will be slightly different from the other.
Good point. Right. And so to some extent, it doesn't, because they're all going to have a slightly different PC zone, it doesn't matter. Okay. Just also wanted to respond to one more thing that Commissioner Heckman said, which was that the developer is going to be putting in a lot of money into these parcels. They may or may not, but currently, at least with respect to this development agreement, they're not necessarily putting that much into the cannery building. They're going to be building the garage, and they're going to be putting some into the cannery building to the rehab it, but the playground global part isn't going to be changed. Is that correct?
Correct.
And similarly with the Audi and the Ash building. Is that correct, Ms. Rebel?
So the Audi building is not proposed to change. The Ash building's not proposed to change. They are rehabbing. Yes, the playground global portion is not changing.
Right. And the bulk of the investment is actually in the townhomes as well as the parking structure.
So, well, just speaking to, I guess, two things. I think, I don't know how amortization analysis works, but I know that it takes into account everything I think that they're spending money on. And so, you know, they are dedicating the parcel to the city. They are providing $5 million. I don't know if they are online, so they could maybe speak to, I don't know if they're able to share the cost of like the rehab or anything like that. But the town, yes, the townhome would be a significant portion too, but if you want to hear from them. I
Do we
don't know.
want to hear from them?
I see Mr. Steele is here and some of the other applicant group, but none of I don't see any of their hands being raised, so. And I think the bulk of, I do see Mr. Steele. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer our rough estimation for the first phase, which is all of the work associated with rehabbing the cannery, not including the dedication values or the 5 million, but as you know, our application for the 1% art is estimated over $40 million in the first phase and another 40 million for the townhomes. That's including the garage and all the rehab work that needs to be done, plus the undergrounding, the overhead high tension power lines that currently goes through the parking lot currently. So I think those numbers are low. I'm expecting that our rehab in the garage and all of the associated work is probably going to end up closer to 50 million.
Thank you for that. While you're here, could I ask you if there's any interest or if it's just impractical to consider not building the garage as the townhomes are conditioned on market conditions, and we have heard that they may or may not be built, and building the garage later if you need it? So, because if you are demolishing that portion of the cannery, the 40%, you'll have a lot of surface parking available, and maybe you'll never. It's just an idea that came to me. So it might be kind of impractical.
Thank you, Chair. I think the way our development agreement is structured, the bulk of the cannery parcel, including the portion that will be townhome, is currently one parcel. And part of this is separating it into 5 parcels, but you can't have a parcel under an existing structure or a new structure. So a property line has to have no structures on it. And we intend, the structure of this deal is that we will build this parking structure and start the rehab of the remaining cannery building work and undergrounding the lines. And then once that's in place, we can demo the piece where we relocate the existing tenants into the new rehab portion. Then we tear it down and record a parcel map that creates the dedication parcels for the city's land and creates the townhome parcel. So we would have already built the garage. It's the only way to facilitate the demo of the building and the recording of the parcel line. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for Mr. Steele while he's here?
Thank you, Chair. So, Mr. Steele, I'm curious about the townhomes. You know, the development agreement is structured so that there's not actually an obligation, a mandate that the townhomes be built. And the impression I get is that the interpretation of that flexibility that Sobrato has is that maybe there's a good chance you're not going to build them. And I'm not sure that's a fair interpretation. I know that less than a year ago, I think we approved a townhome development. I think it's Summerhill next to Greer Park, and that is under construction. The market conditions there are apparently favorable. And so I'm just wondering if again, I'm not looking for a commitment that you will definitively build those townhomes in the 10-year time frame, but I'm wondering if you can, if you care to address, why the need for the flexibility regarding the townhomes.
Thank you, Commissioner Heckman. Yeah, it kind of continues on with my explanation of recording the parcel lines and so forth. We would have invested in this case, maybe even as much as $50 million just to get to the point we're making land dedication to the city. We're required to make those land dedications before we start occupying. So we would be in really deep and not be able to build or sell the townhomes for over 2 years, because building the garage and doing these improvements and undergrounding the power lines will take at least 2 years. Do we know there's going to be market demand in 2 years? Townhomes are probably one of the best products relative to the market, going up and down, whereas apartments are very sensitive to the returns and the interest rates. But townhomes have proven, especially in a tight market like Palo Alto, to continually being in demand in good and bad economies. So we're comfortable thinking it's going to happen, but 2.5 years from now, there's no telling. And having made the investment we would have made just to get to the point where we could even consider building the townhomes, we need some time to be able to wait for any kind of market blips that might be in place at that point. And that was the consideration for the period.
So I appreciate that clarification. Let me just ask you, because I know you've been doing this kind of work for a very long time. You get 2 years out from now and the market is not conducive to townhomes, let's say. Have you seen a market that is not conducive to residential development for an 8-year period? I've been through a couple of these cycles and I haven't seen one that lasted that long.
I would agree with you. The one thing that happens when the markets are stressed for ownership type product is they might not build all of them at one time. They might build a few at a time and make sure the market can absorb them before they build more. So it does take a period of time. And the way the development agreement is we have that period of time to produce all of them. So again, we need some flexibility in that, not knowing where we're going to be in 2.5 years.
Okay. All right. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I think there's another question from Commissioner Rectal.
Yeah, this is also for Tim. You talked about how the ownership is very in demand for townhouses. What about condos or flats? How's the demand for that? Is that as resilient as townhouses?
On an ownership basis, developers or builders typically have been avoiding anything of high density flats, condos, and so forth because of the very litigious nature of that and the homeowners association issues that are associated with that versus townhomes, and the resale value and so forth. The rental market, much more sensitive to the interest rates and cost of construction, and they're being stressed currently. I don't know if that's getting to your answer, Commissioner.
Yeah, ARB suggested that we have higher density instead of townhomes. And, we're so close to the train station. That sounds appealing to have more density there. Does that appeal to you at all, having higher density?
We've owned this property since 2000 or 2011, and we've been talking with staff and council members over that time about what to build and how to build it. And we even entitled Mike's Bike Site for rental. And when we finally got through the extended entitlement process, the market had really eroded. And so we were forced to not abandon that entitlement, but to look for other alternatives, and ended up selling it to an affordable housing developer with the entitlements in place, which they even modified after that to be even higher density to be competitive for tax credits. So we've studied this site for a very long time. We've studied the market for a very long time and proposed in our SB 330 the townhome product because we felt it was something that had the highest reasonability of getting built in the nearer term.
So even if you went 4 or 5 stories of apartments or condos, you think it's still more profitable to have townhouses?
I would say it's profitable versus not being profitable.
Okay. The other question is the Audi building, and you're proposing R&D offices there. I mean, one of the things at NVCAP, there was a real desire to have more neighborhood serving offices, medical or dentists or other things that would serve directly to the neighbors. Have you considered that at all for that Audi site?
Yeah, first off, we are incorporating some retail commercial, but a very small amount because we really could not find support for retail services in this area of any scale. And then to come back to a question you asked earlier on the parking there, it is lower parking and we minimized it to what we thought could support multiple uses in that building over time. But the parking that is shown there as existing parking sits within the Santa Clara Valley Water District's easement and would not have been able to do anything other anyway. And Clerk can clarify this and verify it, but I believe too that the majority of the full restoration scenarios really moved towards the portage side of the creek more than this side of the creek in the scenarios that I was privy to seeing.
Yeah, I believe that is correct. It hasn't been there, and so the water's going to want to go up towards the portage side.
Correct.
But so back to the Audi building, you're not considering residential or neighborhood serving businesses there, or is that still something that's in play?
No, we're not. You mentioned earlier also the idea of adding residential above it. The building is fairly new and in pristine condition and didn't warrant tearing it down today for a market that we weren't quite prepared to propose something for.
Okay. And the desire to not have neighborhood serving retail there or offices there, is it just purely due to the rents you can achieve, or are you worried about vacancies?
I'd say probably the latter before the former. But I don't know if they're that far apart, but it would be both.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Anything else from Mr. Steele before we? Okay, thank you, Mr. Steele, very much for providing that information.
My
Now,
pleasure.
there are no lights on, so is there? Oh, I see Mr. Heckman has put his light on. Thank you. Commissioner Heckman, sorry.
Thank you. I had a question for Mr. Yang, really coming out of this conversation and about the townhomes and Commissioner Rechtel's questions about more dense development. So we heard Mr. Steele say that, they're not even going to be in a position to think about the townhomes for 2 years because of the critical path of construction, essentially. So if we were to get 2-3 years down the road and the market had changed, but the market changed in a way that perhaps made, development that was more dense than townhomes more profitable. Is there any reason that Sobrato and the city could not amend the development agreement at that point to allow more density on that site? Is there something that locks in both parties so that couldn't be changed if both parties wanted to during the term of the development agreement?
No, you can amend the development agreement. We've done it a few times for some of the agreements that we have with Stanford as conditions and circumstances change.
Thank you.
Commissioner Chang.
Okay, I just wanted to make one more comment. This has to do with, I'm going to refer to it as page 17 of the staff report. So packet page, it's old packet page 125 and new packet page, goodness, I don't know. It's the section that talks about fiscal resource and impact.
Yes.
Yeah, new packet page.
That's the old packet.
Oh, okay. So staff has presented one way of looking at the public benefits provided to the city. And I think it's an interesting way of looking at it because how you look at public benefits depends on what you look at as the baseline. And this is the way that I was looking at it. So
Packet page 23 of the new.
so packet page 25 of the old packet, page 125 of the old packet, packet page 23 of the new packet, and it would be page 17 of 20 out of this for the staff report, which is consistent across both packets.
Which is so page 17 of the staff report is packet page 24 of the new one. It's the
Okay,
second part of
24,
the discussion.
yes.
So 24.
So staff, the second paragraph there says that staff estimates that the monetary value of the public benefits provided to the city is at least 27 million. So I assume that how staff got there was essentially saying that there's 3.25 acres, of which 2.63 is what they're counting. They're subtracting out 0.62, which is what would have been required under municipal code. So it's about 2 acres.
3.25.
Okay. 2.63. I got it. Okay. 2.6. So then that gets you to about, now my math is screwed up. No, it's 12 times 2.63. No, I can't do it in my head. So that's 31.
Fourth grade Brian will be very disappointed.
Oh, fourth grade Bryna is better at math than 47-year-old Bryna. So
versus 27.
it's 31 plus 5 million, right? And then we're subtracting out some BMR benefits, which gets us to, what was it, 27, right? 36. Okay, so the BMR benefits are about 9 million, it sounds like.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. So if you think about, so am I correct to say that like the current Palo Alto development impact fees, the most recent ones are the ones that are labeled August 22nd of 2022? Like
That's
all right.
That is what is in effect today.
That's what's in effect today. Okay.
They'll
So-
change in a couple of weeks, but today.
Right. And that's what this development agreement, well, that's what they would have, the SB 330 application would have been subject to, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So approximately at least. So before you subtract out the value of the BMR, it would have been about 36 million. So land plus 5 million. What they would have had to give us anyway is about $10 million in housing. Like if they're going to pay in lieu fees based on the square footage, I think it was about $10 million in housing. And depending on the number of units, somewhere between 3.4 or 4 million in parks fees, if they're going to pay in lieu for parks fees. So I think that comes to, something like $14 million in development fees that they would have had to pay between housing and parks. So 36 minus 14 gets you to what, 22 million that we're getting, right?
Okay.
So that's what we're getting over and above the fees that they would have had to pay in a development. And so that's kind of what we're getting. And so what we're choosing between, this is just so that this is how I was going about thinking about it. What we're choosing between is an SB 330 project in which there would have been 91 townhomes, 15 moderate affordability units, about $4 million in park fees, and then some questionable, and then, it's questionable what would have happened with the R&D square footage. Like, would Serato have been allowed to continue it or not? And if they would, then they would have been allowed to. And if not, there might have been like a 15-year sunset period or something like that. Is that right, Albert? Mr. Yang?
That's roughly.
Right, but we don't know what would happen there. And so instead of that, we get the current development agreement plus like 22 million that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten. So that's the benefit of, like, that's a monetary value of the benefit. And I think that's maybe a more helpful way of looking at it in an apples to apples fashion. And I wanted to share that with the rest of the commissioners. I thought it was helpful for me. I mean, there is a distinct benefit. And I think it's hard for us as lay people to decide, well, gee, is that 22 million worth whatever legal risk there might be in terms of it, what's the value of the R&D continuing, what's the value of 160 square feet of office that we're letting Serato continue to use for 10 years? 160,000 square feet of office or R&D use that we're letting continue for 10 years that they potentially wouldn't have otherwise had, but they might have had some of that too. So that's the unknown. And that's really what the negotiations that City Council had weighed. So that's really what we're being asked to consider. Okay, that's all I wanted to share. It was just thoughts. Thanks. Yes, thanks.
So that was helpful in a sense. I see no other lights. Oh, Commissioner Heckman.
Thanks. So I've been sort of focused on some focused points that we've been talking about. And I really wanted to spend a couple minutes talking sort of bigger picture about this issue because we do find ourselves in a really unusual posture. It's an unusual posture for the PTC and for the City Council and for the citizens of Palo Alto. And I think it's made us all struggle to some extent because we have this looming possibility of the SB 330 project. And so unlike, some kind of greenfield situation or just, a more typical situation where a developer comes to us and says, hey, this is what I want to do with the land. And we have more control and we have more leverage here. While we may not have, we have practical limitations. We can only push Serato so far on the alternative before they say, you know what, we're just going to go SB 330 because it's just less brain damage and maybe more profitable for them. So I actually think that the combination of our citizenry and the PTC and the HRB and the ARB have done a good job of exploring just how far we can push. And frankly, I want to commend Serato for being flexible in that process. And so we are, seeing in this most recent version that came to us, I guess, 2 weeks ago for all of you, and then, Commissioner Rectal and I here, but those recommendations that came from the HRB and the ARB that were, picked up by Serato and folded in. So now we've got a wider paseo. We've got that lower parking, right, which really changes the dimensions of things. And so I really think it's been a difficult process, but a productive process. And I do want to say, there's been a lot of talk about the closed session and behind closed doors. And obviously it's in an era where all we talk about is transparency. It's kind of difficult to swallow, but I'm familiar with the nature of closed session, and while it may feel to commissioners and certainly citizens like that closed session is keeping information from us, the real purpose of that closed session has been to allow the city council acting in all of our best interests to keep Sobrato from seeing all our cards. And to have a situation where they can have an open dialogue to discuss risks and possibilities, so it's not so much to keep us in the dark, but to basically maximize our leverage in this process. And so I don't really, I don't think there's anything nefarious about it at all. It seems like it's been appropriately used here and to the benefit of everyone, because we've got a project here that Sobrato it has moved from where Sobrato started, but they're supportive of. I will say that in this process, the last hearing we had some articulate speakers from the public, and we had a letter from a member of the public between the meetings, and then of course in prior meetings we had those same letters, and I really appreciated the effort that the members of the public put into those. The one, I will confess, the one frustration I had, the one thing I would have appreciated more of in the perspective of the public is to show recognition of this tight spot we're in, where we don't have all the flexibility that we normally have. So we can't just say, hey, Sobrato, it's 560 units or you're doing nothing, or whatever. And that was kind of one thing I wish I would have seen more of in the public, which I think the public will have seen from the commission, and that is trying to balance this SB 330 over here versus what can reasonably be obtained that would be better for the city, for the NVCAP area. And I think that we've arrived at a place. I really like this design. I really, we haven't talked about it, and of course we're not the ARB, but I really like the cannery buildings, what they're doing with those, because I think that when you approach those are so unique, and I think they'll be beautiful. And as you approach them, you're going to say, what's going on with those? I haven't seen buildings like that before. And of course, you'll go up to the public area and there'll be a big plaque to explain it to you. So I'm really excited for these improvements in this area, and I'll be supporting the staff recommendation on our recommendation to the council. Thanks.
So I appreciate the process so far as well, and very much appreciate Sobrato's donation of land to the city. I'm just worried we're not going to get townhouses, but I would have, and I do think I understand what closed session is for, and keeping some of our cards close to our heart and not discussing people's financial business in a public hearing. But I think the frustration from the public that I heard was that the land use portion could have been discussed in a public hearing. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to second guess something we weren't involved with. But I will say that, well, I wanted to say that and to thank Sobrato also. But also to say that I just can't quite reconcile that there wasn't enough real thought put into using the whole cannery building. And I agree with you that there's nothing wrong, particularly per se, with the designs for the cannery building. I might have made some different choices, but I'm not on the ARB. But it's just, that's something that we can't undo. And so my disappointment lies in the EIR, really, in that regard, and not particularly with Sobrato or anybody else involved in the negotiation. That being said, a lot of people are not interested in historic preservation, probably the way I am. I recall an earlier project that came to the PTC when I had just been appointed many, many, many years ago now. And there wasn't a lot of support for what I thought was an important historic resource. But it's not just a historic resource, it's a huge cultural resource for a minority group of our community. So I still have a problem with that. And I still want, and I think a lot of good things have come out of the discussion since the council sort of penciled a draft development agreement. And I'm hoping they can still make some improvements when it goes back to them. So that's, and, regardless of which way our recommendation majority goes. So that's my hopes. And unless someone wants to speak, I would be looking for a motion. Okay. Go ahead.
So I guess I want to make my final comments about this, which is regardless of my personal thoughts about the historic preservation of the building, I spoke to this a little bit at the last meeting, but I do think that we fell down a little bit on our EIR. I think that the EIR could be bolstered. I'm not sure that it would have made a difference ultimately. There has to have been, given the large size of the parcel, a different alternative that could have been examined, a different feasible alternative that we're required to look at under CEQA, that could have been examined, that was more of an apples to apples comparison with the 91 or 74 townhome units that didn't cause irreparable damage to the historical resource. And so I think that there really wasn't, other than the do nothing alternative. And I understand that we're not required to look at an exhaustive list of alternatives. There really wasn't an alternative that looked at an adaptive reuse of the cannery that was either a housing adaptive reuse that was an apples to apples adaptive reuse, or a retail or office or parking adaptive reuse that left the entire cannery up. And again, maybe those alternatives would have been eliminated for other reasons, like they might not have met other project objectives, but I feel like we're not dotting our I's and crossing our T's. And so I'm not saying that the project, again, this is as a whole is a problem, but I do think that in order to, especially because of the volume of public comments that we received in prior meetings, as well as at the last meeting about the historic resource, that we didn't do what we should have done. We probably should have looked at least one more alternative that took that really seriously. And that hopefully we can bolster the EIR just a little bit. Might come to the same conclusion, but at least that we look at that we can point to a serious alternative. So that's with respect to the EIR. And then with the land use, I do hope that we can, come to either a CN or mixed use land use designation for the three parcels.
Commissioner Heckman?
I'm ready to make a motion unless there are further comments.
I don't, I see Commissioner Aiken's light.
This is just a question which may be relevant to the structure of the motion. I think the question of whether we go to CN or mixed use for land use might be a separate issue from whether we follow staff's recommendation for the other issues at hand. So are we perhaps looking at two motions here, one to affirm the staff's recommendation and one to recommend to council that the use of CN or mixed use be considered? I don't know what you had in mind, so I'm asking you.
I wasn't going to do that, but I'm open to doing that, basically breaking out what I think is attachment D, the fourth, so I'm on new packet page 8, page 1 of the staff report, where it gives us the 4 bullets for recommendation. So I think what we're talking about is separating out the third bullet, which is the zoning piece. Am I following you?
Yeah, I think there may be other references to CS in the other documents, but that's the core of it.
Well, so then let me ask Mr. Yang if we wanted to break out the issue of the base zoning.
Land use.
Well, no, CN, well, land use, I guess let's stop and clarify terms. To me, land use is what you're actually doing with the land, right? Zoning is the thing we talk about as CN or CS. That's a land use, that's a zoning designation.
The confusion comes from the fact that CN and CS are both land uses and they are zones. So it's always, that's why we always mess it up when we talk about it. But I do see that our city attorney is here, so maybe.
Yes. Can you clarify, Mr. Yang?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I think when most of the commissioners are using the phrase land use, they're talking about comprehensive plan land use designations.
Okay.
And that's the situation where we have both CN and CS are comprehensive plan land use designations and zoning districts.
Okay. And
The zone on these would be PC and then.
well,
And multifamily residential.
so Mr. Yang, is there a base zoning under the PC zoning?
No, there's
Okay.
not. What we're talking about, here, should it be CN or CS or mixed use? The commissioners have generally been talking about what land use designation in our comprehensive plan should we have for this site.
Okay. So, and does that issue run through all 4 of these bullets?
I think it could be easily separated out as a separate motion.
Okay. So perhaps what we should do is take that first, do you think, Commissioner Aiken? See where that plays out, because then I think there's no mystery about everything else.
Unless there's an objection, that seems like a good approach to me.
All right, and then
Vice Chair Chang?
Yeah, I like that plan, and I can make a motion about the land use then. Okay, so then I would like to move that instead of the CS land use, that we instead use a mixed use land designation as specified on page 33 of the current comprehensive plan. But that we modify the language of the description of mixed use such that where it says FARs between 0.15 and 1.15 may be used for residential purposes, we change it to say that up to 100% of FAR may be used for residential purposes in a planned community zone.
Wait.
Can you say that again? I was
Sure, because
having trouble.
Sure. So there's a section of the description under mixed use that says FAR between 0.15 and 1.15 may be used for residential purposes. And I think what we want to say instead is that up to 100% of FAR may be used for residential purposes in a planned community zone. Just again, to allow for the flexibility in a planned community zone to limit it just to PCs, which these 3 would be.
So it would be changed, so far between 1.1,
No.
0.15 and.
Yeah, 0.15 and 1.15. It says, so we just want to say that 100% of FAR may be used for residential purposes in a planned community zone, just to broaden it. But I don't know what the broader implications will be, so I just want to say in a PC.
So you want to consider that zone. You don't want to consider CN.
Yes, I want to say mixed use because I think that that's closest to what we want.
Okay.
And can I just put a pin in that for a second? Because Ms. Rabel, you were also looking to see if there was one of the parcels for which the 1.15 was a problem, the 1.1.
Yeah, so it's actually not a problem. You
Okay,
are
I didn't think so.
correct in
Okay,
that.
great. So we
Yeah.
can leave it as is then. That's just the one.
I'm sorry, I was looking specifically at the office zones at the time, so let me just triple check that for the actual, and I realized, I'm sorry, that the answer to that question is actually in the packet on the zoning tables. So I'm just going back to that. Hold on. The townhome development exceeds that. That was the issue. It was the townhome development exceeds that. It's a 1.49.
Right, but that's not a problem because FAR above 1.15 can be used for residential purposes.
If you make that change, right? Oh, wait.
Well, it
Wait,
says that although development located along transit corridors or near multimodal centers will range up to 2.0 FAR, with up to 3.0 FAR possible where higher FAR would be an incentive to meet community goals.
Okay.
So I think it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So it actually fits really. It's not perfectly written, so instead of CS land use mixed use land use as specified on page 33 of comp plan, but modify the language description of mixed use such that, and I would put quotes before FAR. Yeah, open quote. FAR up to 0.15 and 1.15 may be used for, not of, residential purpose. Be changed to, and then we want open quotes up to 100% of FBAR may be used for, that's correct now. There's a separate sentence, which doesn't need to be changed in the description that says, there's a separate sentence that says FARs will range up to 1.15, although development located along transit corridors or near multimodal centers will range up to 2.0 FAR with up to 3.0 FAR possible, where higher FAR would be an incentive to meet community goals, et cetera, et cetera. Then it goes on to say the FAR above 1.15 must be used for residential purposes. Then it says FAR between 0.15 and 1.15 may be used for residential purposes.
Okay, my point was it's just a little confusing if you read the motion out of context. So I'm thinking about what council may misinterpret inadvertently. So I would just specify like something there to say, well, the other part's not changed or something. I don't know.
I see. So, but modify the language of the description of mixed use such that the text that reads be changed to, and all other texts remain the same. Yes. Thank you for your suggestions, Commissioner. I actually think there may be one other sentence that would need to be struck because right now it says, as of the adoption of this comp plan, the mixed use designation is currently only applied to the south of Forest Avenue area. And we probably need to strike that sentence if this motion is passed. So I would also say that we need to strike that sentence.
Okay, So, and to strike the last sentence that reads,
It's the second to last sentence
the second to last sentence that reads.
that
as-
refers to SOFA.
As of the adoption of this comprehensive plan, the mixed-use designation is currently only applied in the South of Forest area, which is actually incorrect in any case.
So we should strike it anyway.
Yeah.
She's amending the text of the land use. We're doing a comprehensive plan amendment to amend the text of
Yeah.
that section of the land use plan.
Yeah.
Element that
Yeah.
defines what this is.
I mean, we were already proposing a comp plan land use
Right.
text amendment. Anyway. Yeah. Do you want to suggest that we add kind of language related to that?
You know, she knows what she's doing.
Yeah. Can we just reference it as service commercial land use instead of CS too? 'Cause we typically,
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to say surface commercial land use.
So I do have one concern.
page 33 of the comp plan, just FYI.
I'll second.
So when staff is ready, I do have a question about development located along transit corridors or near multimodal centers will range up to 2.0 FAR, sort of in the middle of this definition, up to 3.0 FAR possible where higher FAR would be a center to meet community goals. And the consistent with the comp plan's encouragement of housing near transit centers. If we are encouraging those FARs here, if this is located, if this location would be considered located along a transit corridor or near multimodal centers. That's my only concern. I should have brought my card.
Sorry, can you say that one more time? What?
So about 2/3 of the way into that paragraph, there's a phrase about near transit centers or transit corridors or multimodal centers. FARs could range up to much higher, 2.0 to 3.0. Would that apply to this, to the Sobrato site?
Yes, I would say it does. The transit corridor is El Camino Real, and transit center would definitely be Cal Ave, and it's within a half mile of both of those. So definitely within a 0.25 of El Camino. So
Is that a yes? Sorry.
yes.
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 I guess I recognize that there's density. I'm a little bit less concerned about it because it's still it's still a PC zone. And so any changes to the buildings that are in this development agreement would require going through the entire process that we're going through right now. In other words, it would need to go through ARB and PTC and city council. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other comments before we call the vote?
I want to ask a question for Doria.
Oh,
You-
thank you.
You were more leaning towards CN
Yes.
land use designation. And why is that? Can you explain?
It has, CN is the mixed use designation that is the most neighborhood friendly. It allows for a lot of commercial. It allows for all commercial, mixed use, or all residential, but it's just a more appropriate designation, in my opinion, for an interior site such as this, one that is not along El Camino. And CN is equally oftenly used along El Camino. So I just think it's more what we had in mind, I believe, as we've been talking about development in this area in general.
So I don't necessarily have an objection to CN in and of itself, because they're both mixed use. I mean, in terms of accommodating what the development agreement needs, both CN and mixed use can do it. I was going with sort of the spirit of what the verbiage that's in the comp plan captures. And when I read, it's not that CN's not good. It's just that CN talks about shopping centers with, a cluster of street front stores, which, while would be lovely, is also not.
It's a prevailing zone along El Camino from where El Camino,
Which I understand, but it's also not multifamily housing, which is what I think what we wanted.
it is multifamily housing. It can be developed residentially.
No, I understand that it allows for it. I'm just saying that that's not what the description is in the comp plan. I can go either way though. So
Well, why don't we put are you interested in putting flexibility into it and saying CN or mixed
I could go with
use?
CN or mixed use.
Because that
yes.
gives some flexibility in the future.
Is that a friendly amendment?
Yes.
I accept the friendly amendment.
Can I just make one note? So the land use designation for CN doesn't specifically speak to it, but just to make you aware that the CN zoning does not allow multifamily. It only allows multifamily as a mixed use development, and it also doesn't allow research and development use in it. So that's not to say, again, you're rezoning everything as a PC, so you don't necessarily have to align with the CN zoning, but that CN zoning aligns with the CN land use designation, which is why the land use designation doesn't speak to office and residential R&D kind of uses and multifamily development. Really.
So what I understand is, though we have made a distinction in our code for a very long time between R&D and office, we don't enforce it in any way. And that's been as long as I've been on the Planning Commission. We don't make that distinction in a practical sense. And so that isn't prohibitive to me. In fact, I can think of many examples of CN zone places or R&D zone places that just have general office. And that's probably something that needs to be updated in the code, but that isn't a problem for me, but I think leaving it as a choice as an either or is better. That's just what I think, and
I'm fine leaving it as a choice and leaving that up to the city council.
Then I think,
so I would accept
Commissioner Heckman's light, but I think that's been on since the other motion process. Or do you want to speak to this?
Well, no, I'd like to have the discussion clarifying what the motion is finished first. So it seems like there was a friendly amendment. I'm not sure if that was seconded, and it's certainly not reflected in what's written in front of us. So let's focus on getting something on paper first.
Is the friendly amendment accepted by the seconder?
Yes.
Okay. And let's wait for that to get up there. In the meantime, I'd like to ask the staff if we need to keep the entire staff here, because we're getting to a motion period of maybe some of them could go home, and it would be nice, it would be important, I think, for Albert to stay. Does that sound like an appropriate time for some members of staff to go?
Sure, we do have, we have a transportation staff, we have our CEQA consultant, our historic consultant. So if you guys don't have any further questions for them. And it's totally,
Okay.
it's totally fine.
What I'm hearing is that we would need city attorney and the CEQA and historic consultant to stay just a little bit longer.
Thanks.
Thank you.
What was the amendment?
No, go ahead.
The amendment was to say instead of service commercial, used neighborhood commercial or mixed use land use.
But then what happens to the rest of the paragraph? Because that's tailored towards mixed use.
So I might suggest, rather than trying to kind of wordsmith the amendments, we could just have direction for, staff to modify, the language as appropriate. Because I think we probably want to take some time to think through the implications for other properties.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that. That's good advice. Okay. Does everybody understand the motion? Commissioner Heckman, go ahead.
Yeah, so with staff to modify language as appropriate, I think what we're then talking about doing is getting rid of a lot of the particular language you had, the maker of the motion had suggested specifically regarding mixed use, because it could now be either one. And so if it were mixed use, then certain changes would need to be made. If it's neighborhood commercial, different changes to a different part of the comp plan would need to be made. And so I think Mr. Yang's suggestion is rather than continue to try to wordsmith that, let's leave it to staff. And so I think we should do that for both neighborhood commercial or mixed use, because frankly, we're doing this on the, this discussion is happening on the fly. And while staff had, studied service commercial land use designation sufficient to where they were comfortable recommending it, and to figure out what needed to be changed in the comp plan to make it to make this project described in the development agreement entirely consistent. They have not gone through that exercise to that extent, to my understanding, on mixed use, certainly, and maybe not on neighborhood commercial, although they looked at it. So I think that exercise would be in front of staff, and we shouldn't be basically feeding them any language. We should leave it to them to go through the same diligence they did to support their original thought of service commercial. Having said that, I won't be supporting this motion because I don't think we should kick the can down the road to the council. I think if we, staff's recommendation is service commercial. If we think neighborhood commercial is better and can articulate why, then that should be our recommendation. If we think mixed use land designation is better and can articulate why, that should be our recommendation. But this idea that we don't like service commercial, anything would be better. Neighborhood commercial, mixed use, just council, you figure it out. I don't think we're doing our job here. I was ready to support I was persuaded by Vice Chair Chang's analysis on mixed use land use, and was ready to support that once I confirmed with staff that with these language changes that you had suggested, the development agreement project would be entirely consistent with the land use designation, but we're not getting there, at least not with this motion. So thank you.
Oh. To me, I kind of agree with Bart, because I don't see the big difference between the two. I mean, this is kind of the principle thing. And so I think I'd lean towards just having mixed use. I think that's the cleaner of the two.
If that's what it takes to get the votes, then I'm happy to do that because I think that for me, the mixed use description works better. And really, this is about the point of doing this is to make sure that we can accommodate the need for this development agreement while for the long term aiming directionally towards something that is kind of in the spirit. We don't have a concrete NB cap that's approved, but in the spirit of what we have heard NB cap wants.
So would you like to change your mind about the amendment?
It sounds like we would, right? So
Yeah,
I'm gonna,
I think Bart
we're gonna
convinced me
reverse
to-
that amendment then.
Okay.
Because it'd be different if there's some fundamental trade-off, but they really both get you the same result.
Right, specifically because there's a PC zone on top of this, so we should be okay.
That's simplicity is better.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're, Ms. Zhao, we're undoing the friendly amendment.
So do you want to keep it as the original motion with the specific language, or would you like to make it?
Yes, I think with the specific language.
Okay.
Okay.
May I now suggest a friendly amendment to that version? So I do like the idea of giving staff the opportunity to look more deeply to make sure we didn't miss a change. So I'm wondering if we can, I would propose that we keep the double asterisk staff to, and I would say further, because we are modifying language here, to further modify language as appropriate. And I would say, to state our goal, to ensure consistency of the project defined in the development agreement with the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, accepted.
Accepted.
So was that an amendment to the end to say, like, to keep this specific language and then to say and for staff? Or was it
Correct.
instead? Okay.
It was adding the word further to the double asterisks.
And she got that.
To ensure consistency with the,
Of the project described in the development agreement with the comprehensive plan.
Okay. Everybody ready for the vote? Okay, Ms. Dow, if you could please call the vote.
But just before we do that,
Oh,
I do think that the preface to all of these motions needs to be that we have considered the EIR. If you look on packet page, where is it, in the recommendation? Yeah, 0.1. So I really think the motion should start that way, that having considered the EIR and EIR mitigation measures in attachment N, we make this motion. Packet page 8, page 1 of the staff report.
oh, page 1.
well, that's my other grumpy motion. So
Is your intention to say that this motion is consistent with the EIR, to indicate that?
No, what we have to do, we have to consider the EIR before we make our recommendation.
Right.
And that's all we're saying. We're not passing judgment on the EIR. That's the council's job. But we have to, the staff recommendation is that we consider the EIR and then make recommendations to council. So all I'm suggesting is that the preface of this motion be, having considered the EIR and the
Oh, that's
mitigation
fine.
measures,
That's
Sure,
fine.
that's
here's
fine.
what we recommend.
Great.
I think we are now ready to call the vote, Ms. Dow.
Okay. Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
Commissioner Vice Chair Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Commissioner Rekdal,
Yes.
Chair Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton,
Yes.
motion carries 6-0.
Okay.
I'm ready for the next motion
Yes.
to wrap it up. All right, let me try this. Yeah, having considered the environmental impact report and EIR mitigation measures in attachment M, I move, having considered the environmental impact report and EIR mitigation measures in attachment N, that the PTC recommend that the council approve the development agreement in attachment B, the resolution amending the comprehensive plan and comprehensive plan land use map in attachment C, the ordinance amending the zoning district from RM30, general manufacturing, commercial services, and single-family residential to planned community zoning district in attachment D, and the record of land use action in attachment E, including findings for architectural review and for a vesting tentative map with exceptions and conditions of approval of the proposed project, all of which modified to the extent applicable by the motion just approved. And further subject to any, minor typographical errors and other fill in the blank corrections that staff finds in their final processing of these documents as they move to council.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Would the maker like to speak to his motion?
No, thank you.
Would the seconder like to speak to the motion?
No.
Okay, let's take a minute here unless somebody else would like to speak. Commissioner Chang?
So I have a question for staff because I already asked this question in pre-meeting. If I want to make a motion, which may or may not succeed, that staff does not, that council does not certify the EIR, at what point do I do that relative to this?
That could be a motion that follows this one.
Okay.
Thank you. Let me see if this is. Are the maker and seconder happy with
Yep.
DC?
But there was some final language, I think.
Yeah.
That,
Sure,
yeah.
sure. So let's see. Yeah, so the 4 bullets should be identical to what's in the staff report. I just read it. And then after the 4th bullet, it's really modified as required by the motion just passed, because that motion that was just passed has some potential effect on each of those documents. So let's see. Modified as required.
Modified to reflect the
Well,
motion?
modified as required by the motion, the motion just adopted or just approved. And let's get this clause first. So it would be as required by the motion. And I get rid of the word, which should be modified rather than and modify. So the word modified, IED. Comma after past. And to allow minor changes by staff to correct typographical errors, fill in blanks, etc. Mr. Yang, is that a sufficient addendum to clearly state our intention?
Yes, I think that's fine.
Okay. Maker and the seconder are happy? Okay, then if there are no other comments, Commissioner Chang?
So I have a comment here, and this is one where, again, I don't know quite how to weigh in on it. So as I understand, this development agreement was something that was struck because where, it was an effort by council to get some public benefit for the city, along with preserving a historic resource. Since the time of the negotiation, we discovered that the historic resource cannot be preserved to the extent that we thought that the negotiators thought possible. So I'm wondering, and I don't know what the council would think of that because it hasn't been back to council since then. There's an option here, alternative actions, which is to approve the project with modified findings or conditions. And we saw that the ARB had some modified findings. And I'm just wondering if, maybe we do it as a separate motion. But we've heard, I've heard a number of my colleagues kind of also wonder, gosh, is there some way that we could get some more housing? And the ARB kind of had the same question. And then and Commissioner Heckman had also said, gee, if in a couple of years, is there anything that precludes us from renegotiating the development agreement if it's amenable? And I just don't know how much that was explored by both sides. So I would love for us to find a way to somehow include that suggestion to City Council, because again, we're not privy to sort of all the trade-offs that were made. And so if at the time it was like, okay, well, this is what we can get to preserve this historic resource. Okay, well, now that the historic resource is not being preserved, would we trade things off differently? That's kind of where, should we get more housing instead? So that's kind of where I'm.
Are you proposing this as an amendment?
I'm trying to figure out how I'm struggling with this.
Yeah, because I think if you want to propose an amendment and it's accepted, that's one thing. Otherwise, I'm not sure how it's a part of this motion.
Okay, I guess I won't. Yeah, I'm struggling with how to amend, but
I think it's out of scope as well. And I feel like we're treading on dangerous territory because there is a less preferable option that has more housing. So we got to really understand the trade-offs at a larger level. So that's what I'm worried about.
And I guess I would add, I don't think your concept, whether I support it or not, can be a follow-up motion here. I think because if we adopt the motion that I have made and has been seconded, then basically from the commission, that particular question is answered, right? And so
Yes.
If you want that motion, then you'd vote no on this
Yes.
one and try another one.
Right.
That's right. And that's why I ask the question if Commissioner Chang wanted to make an amendment to this motion, because I don't see any other way to incorporate. Because you can't vote yes for this and then have another motion that denies what you just voted on.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your concern, but what I think we should do if there's no further conversations is call the vote. Okay. Okay. Ms. Dow, if you could please call the vote.
Commissioner Templeton,
Yes.
Chair Suma,
No.
Commissioner Rectal,
Yes.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
motion carries 5-1.
Okay, and I will ask myself if I would like to speak to my no vote. And I would, but very briefly, it's really, I had a feeling this would pass, and it's a no vote because I just have not resolved in my mind some of the issues that we've discussed earlier this evening, which I don't think I need to mention. And in fact, Commissioner Chang just sort of mentioned them. But, my uncertainty about how we got to this point, I very much appreciate all the work of all the people involved, and I trust the council to take our concerns and see if there's any leeway in this agreement. So with that, this item concludes. No. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, excuse me. We do have another motion, but thank you very much to everyone who got us to this point.
So this is like beating a dead horse at this point. But no, I do feel strongly about this because I think we have a duty to make sure that we do as we should do with respect to CEQA. And I don't think that we did. So I would like to make a motion that the PTC recommend that the city council does not certify the EIR because it does not provide alternatives that satisfy the requirement of CEQA to avoid or substantially lessen a significant effect of the project, which is namely the unavoidable impact on the historic building.
Do I have a second? I'll second. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah. So as some of our public commenters wrote, this CEQA requires that whenever there's a significant or an unavoidable impact, that there's an alternative that examines avoiding that impact. And while not every single possible alternative under the sun needs to be examined, this EIR examined a do nothing option as well as housing options, but didn't look at other options such as parking or other adaptive reuse such as office, other than tearing the building down. And so there could have been other things that were done. Some were suggested by the public, such as, using parking and maybe putting parking in that section of the building, and then maybe moving the townhomes to where the parking was. And so we didn't look at options like that. We didn't look at going higher, and maybe some of them would have been infeasible from a project perspective, but those options weren't examined. And so to dot our I's and cross our T's, I think that should have been done.
Yeah, and as a seconder, I'll briefly say, yes, that I agree with those comments that and it was also a problem for me that the housing option was explored as, I think it's 231, and 74 was being proposed in the townhouses. So it wasn't the feasibility of using part of the cannery for housing was encumbered by a much, much higher number. So I do see another light. Commissioner Templeton?
Did Commissioner Rectal want to go first, or
No,
were you on before me? Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I appreciate the intent of the Vice Chair's motion. I don't intend to support it because I believe all of the feasible practical options were considered. Having worked in and shopped in and spent a lot of time in these buildings, I don't believe they're suitable for any of the uses that you mentioned. And I think that we can address that very easily by letting staff know we want them to write that out, but I don't think it needs to be in the EAR in order to recommend it. Thank you.
So I'd like to just add that if we don't write it out, I mean, I think So I think we need to write it out because we can have people contest our EIR and that will hold up the process. I had asked staff if we thought that this could be remedied before it gets to council. They weren't sure that it could be. So that's why I think we need to do this.
So would the commission like our secret consultant or staff to speak to?
Sure.
Okay. I think it might be helpful in this case for maybe our secret consultant, Abe Leader, is available to speak a little bit in general to start off about the requirements of CEQA alternatives analysis. And then maybe staff can add too.
Thank you, Ms. Raybold and commissioners. Yes, I'm Abe Leader with Rincon Consultants, here sitting in for our project manager, Carly Kaufman. And a lot of the things that have been said about alternatives are correct, that, and I've heard all the thoughts tonight, that an EIR does not need to consider every conceivable alternative. That is true, but it has to be a reasonable range. And I think that's maybe one of the points people were making in different words. But the alternatives do need to be limited to those that meet the project objectives and are feasible, as well as reducing an impact. So alternative 2, reduces that impact a little, but what we found was that any reuse to residential would require certain changes to the building that would render it ineligible. So it did not avoid the significant unavoidable impact. And some of the other concepts in consultation with staff and the city attorney, because of various site planning considerations and also the project objectives, which I won't read out to you in total, but really do constrain a little bit the kinds of concepts that we've heard. And although they could have been included, the EIR is adequate for CEQA because it does consider a reasonable range within those constraints.
Thank you for that, Mr. Leader. Any other comments before we vote? Unless staff has more to add.
I don't think I really have anything to add to that. Just that some of the alternatives that Commissioner Chang did mention, we feel did not meet the basic project objectives, and therefore were not considered further in EIR.
Okay,
I mean, is there any risk that someone could challenge this and slow things down?
I mean, that's always a risk for any project. There's nothing unique about this project in that respect.
And is there anything we can do between now and when it goes to council to minimize that effect, minimize that chance?
So it's something that staff can take a look at, but as Mr. Leader said, explained, we do feel that the document, meets the requirements of CEQA. But we can sort of examine if there's anything more we can do in the next month or so.
And when is this anticipated to go to council?
Currently August 21st.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Anything else before? Oh, Mr. Heckman, Commissioner Heckman.
Thank you. Yeah. So the concern I have is sometimes when you make an effort to bolster an environmental document, you rise to the point where you have to send it around again for another set of comments. And so I'm sure our staff knows where that line is, but that would be my concern, is that, and if you don't, then that's kind of low hanging fruit for somebody that wants to challenge the project, to claim, hey, you made these additions, you didn't recirculate. So I'd be very cautious to do that. I'm glad that our consultant identified the limitations. I think that the concept of project alternatives is easy to, it's kind of hard to get your arms around because it is more constrained than it sounds like. You're really looking for, is there a different way that does most of what this applicant is trying to do, but in an environmentally preferable way? And all they're required to do is have a reasonable range. There are cases out there that say, People can always think of another alternative that could be studied. But all that the city has to establish is that it studied, a reasonable range. And we've heard staff say that they think that's been done here. So I won't be supporting the motion, and I'm hoping that we don't add fuel to some potential fire.
Thank you. We never want to do that. Commissioner Templeton?
Yes, I agree. I don't think it's helpful. I think it's risky, and I don't think it's what we've been asked to do is consider it, which we have done. And I think it would be much more productive if Vice Chair Chang would consider just giving her comments about this to staff rather than making a motion. I don't think it's necessary. I would encourage you to withdraw it, but I wouldn't support it if we do vote. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Ms. Dow, if you could call the vote, please.
Yes. Chair Suma,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Aiken,
No.
Commissioner Heckman,
No.
Commissioner Rectal,
No.
Commissioner Templeton.
No.
Motion fails 2-4.
Okay. Now I think we have concluded this item. So we can move on to the next thing, which is approval of minutes. And while we're opening our books to that page, I would like to thank once again everybody involved, including the applicant team, very much for their hard work. And thank the council in advance for looking at it as carefully as my colleagues did. So the minutes that need to be.
Yes. June 28th. Yeah. I didn't. Here, you can give her that. That's the agenda. Look at the bottom of the page.
Okay.
Can I make a motion?
Approval of Planning and Transportation Commission draft verbatim and summary minutes of June 28th, 2023. Do I have a?
I will move approval as revised by Ms. French, at least as to the verbatim version. I didn't see the summaries, and myself as to both.
Do I have a second?
Second.
If there are no comments, if we could call the vote, please.
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chang,
Abstain.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Commissioner Rectal,
Abstain.
Chair Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0-2.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to move on to commissioner comments, et cetera. And I think this would be the time we would have a discussion about, some commissioners wanted to have a little break, a hiatus, and this would be the time to do that, I think. And I think that any of the staff that want to leave at this point can, of course. Do you have a proposal, Commissioner Templeton, for this?
No, as I told you, I don't have any dates that I'll be missing, but I think others have mentioned it.
Okay. Does anybody have a preference or a proposal about this item? Not an item.
No. Let me just say, I don't, I've just taken my vacation, but I do think that, this discussion started maybe in May when we were really looking at in advance whether we want to take off what matches up with, I think, the first week of the school year. So, and I think the discussion, really, that's when it should happen, because, we're talking about people making plans and things like that. So if people want to take a meeting off between now and the end of the year, or, have it canceled, I'm okay with that. I don't need it. But I do think we should advance. I think we do ourselves a favor for planning if we advance plan a little bit better.
I agree. I think that it's unfortunately, we've had a trickle of meetings where we're losing one or two commissioners at a time and we don't have the full group here for discussion. And that would be the benefit of planning in advance. I know we've all talked about it. We just weren't sure how the summer was going to go. But I think looking at having a hiatus is good for our collective discussion because we can maximize the number of people that are aligned on the same dates. In my case, I'm going to be gone the entire time between this meeting and the next meeting. But I will technically be back, so I can attend. But in general, I don't think it's good for us to necessarily. Our schedule has been interesting lately where we're having shorter meetings, which is great, but we're having more meetings, which without break in between. So something to start thinking about for future planning is, are there times when we can have a planned time off like council does or like other organizations that usually don't meet in August? And I know that I can see that we're being shy as commissioners here, but I want to encourage you, if you want to take August off, speak up, because that's what I think that's what the chair is trying to encourage us to do, is have a discussion on that topic. Thank you.
Do any other commissioners have an interest in speaking to this, about this?
Sure, briefly. I have many fewer constraints, I think, than the rest of you do. So I am happy to go along with any consensus that forms. But in short, I don't feel the need for a strictly scheduled time off. I'll simply take advantage of it if it exists.
So I will be out of town on the August 30th, but I was planning to attend, like virtually anyway. So it doesn't, I don't need the time off. So I don't, and then I had no preference because, and I know that I have to be gone on September 27th, but I don't need that off either, right? Like I don't, if nobody else needs it off, that's just, that these things weren't, like, they weren't dates that I could have planned for per se. So, yeah. My schedule wasn't such this year that I could have said in advance, oh, if we have a recess at this time, I can then aim to be gone at that time, which is why I didn't have a preference.
Do you guys think that we should next year plan ahead and try and consolidate?
I'm open to anything about this. It's not a particular interest of mine, but I just, and I won't be chair next year, I don't think so, but whatever, I was open all along to whatever anybody wanted. I think we just didn't have no one took a strong position either way.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I think there's also been, we've had a lot of change. We had a lot of new folks start. We have them starting in April now. And like, it's awkward, right, to have had this discussion, but I think running this experiment this year where we didn't take time off, it's been a slog.
Okay. So we'll table that for this year, it sounds like. And do I have any other comments or announcements or things of that nature?
Yeah. And one thing I think we should consider is moving up the staff reports so we get 2 weekends. Because there's been some cases where I get it on Thursday and I can't look at till Saturday, and then we have family stuff over the weekend, and all of a sudden Monday night I'm cracking it open for the first time. And you need to look it over and ferment in the back of your brain. You do a better job when you don't just drink through the fire hose. So if we can get the staff reports earlier, that would be a good thing.
Well, also at the last meeting at this very same time, Commissioner comments, it was brought up that the BCC handbook calls for all boards, commissions, and committees to have their staff reports come out for the public and the commissions at a week before. So I think I think our staff is under a lot of pressure already. So I think we would have to hear from staff about the feasibility of that.
Well, I mean, it doesn't change the workload.
It doesn't change the workload.
In the steady state, right?
Yeah. So I agree. I don't think we always have enough time.
I would suggest that it can change the workload because first of all, I do, I work in a lot of jurisdictions and 5 days is really 5 to 6 days is really pretty standard. And I remember when we saw the handbook and it said 7 days, I remember we had a discussion about that. Well, we're not doing that. How, can you realistically do that? Well, we don't know, but we're going to try. But the farther you push it out, what you do is you put more time between the staff report and the hearing. And that means that when you have items of interest, you're going to get more correspondence after the staff report compared to when we get it now. And staff has to deal with that. And so we're going to have more of, what do we call them, the at-place memos, right? Because all this correspondence has come in because, the staff report was released 12 days ago. In my impression, again, not just with this staff, but with all staffs, is they are often, it's a lot of work. I usually have, when I want staff to consider something in a jurisdiction I'm working in, they usually want my work a week before their staff report is due at least. So they have time to synthesize it, fold it in and not just attach it and mention it. So I think it puts a lot of pressure on staff. I mean, I feel for you because sometimes I have those weekends too, where it's like, where am I going to find the time? But I think that's just an issue. It comes with the turf.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this, I also noted that in our procedures or bylaws, groups of 5 get 10 minutes. And here on the front of our agenda, it says 15. And I think 15 is a really long time.
Yes.
And if 10 is, and you know me, I'm a big fan of hearing from the public, but I think 15 is pretty long. So, and that's just a clerical error that gets incorporated. And so maybe staff should look into fixing that. And I don't want to have a long discussion about it this evening because we've all been here a while and I know that some of the commissioners aren't feeling particularly well. So if there's nothing else, I think we should adjourn. Okay, thank you, everyone. Meeting adjourned. Okay.